This is a new black and white film from a couple of years ago, but for once it's actually a new film and not some repackaged Kodak Vision 3 stock or repackaged Fomapan. This is P30, an 80 ISO black and white film made in Italy by Film Ferraina. P30 is a black and white film stock available in 35mm and 120 formats now. It is an 80 ISO panchromatic black and white film, which means it is sensitive to all visible wavelengths of light, unlike orthochromatic film. And what's interesting about this film is that it has a really high silver content. And this gives the image some really interesting characteristics, which we'll get into later. But before we get into any images, I want to talk a little bit about Ferrania's history, because the company has been around for over 100 years, starting in the early 1900s or late 1800s, depending on how you mark it. What we do know is that by 1938, they were producing a lot of film, and after establishing themselves as a name in film production, they were actually bought out by 3M in the 60s, and they actually grew into the third largest film manufacturer in the world at the time. Now, you might be thinking, that's a bit odd. How was Ferrania the third largest film manufacturer in the world? And I haven't really heard of a lot of their films. You know, Kodak and Fuji are very recognizable names, even Ilford, but you never saw boxes of Ferrania film. Well, the reason for that is a lot of Ferrania's products were actually rebadged and sold under different brand names. All of these Scotch films were actually rebadged Ferrania films sold under that brand by 3M. Funny enough, 3M is actually still using that Scotch brand, because here I have Scotch spray mount adhesive. They're also sold under a bunch of different brands and repackaged for pharmacies and businesses and things like that who wanted film with their name on it. And Film Ferrania stayed like this until the 2000s, when the film market collapsed, and unfortunately Ferrania had to shutter its factory and close its doors to manufacturing. But that's not the end of the story, because in 2012, two men by the names of, check notes, Nicola Baldini and Marco Pagini, I think that's how you pronounce them, I don't know, I'm not Italian, sorry for butchering your names, fellas, but they visited the shuttered Ferrania factory in 2012 and realized that there was a potential there if somebody could come in with some money to fix up machines and transform it into a smaller manufacturer still capable of producing film for those who want to shoot it. And so in 2014 they launched the 100 Years More of Analog Film Kickstarter, which went extremely well, and they got the money to start production back up. Unfortunately, they had been a little bit over ambitious and were initially promising color slide film in like 2 years, and unfortunately they missed pretty much all their goals. But it wasn't due to their fault. A lot of it was due to things like crazy construction work on the site and demolitions of buildings and all kinds of problems. They had issues moving the machines into what's called, I think, the LRF building, which is like the labs building. So they're kind of converting the labs building into a manufacturing place. They had issues with like water supply, electricity supply, and then the building had like loads of asbestos in it, which is something you really don't want to find in a building you're doing up, because it causes all kinds of problems, and that took months to fix. And also the fact that they wanted to reproduce color slide film, one of the most difficult films, as early as that. So you can see how the tits on the project went upwardly inclined very, very fast. Even with all the delays and craziness, in 2017 they managed to get their first kind of handmade film, although I would state it would be made with more manual labor than probably should have been, film out there in the form of the alpha versions of Ferrania P30. And ever since 2017 they have been tuning their machinery, tuning their process, getting their factory up and running properly, and now you can find Film Ferrania products in most places that sell film. And not only have they achieved one film, they now have 3 films available. P30, their 80 ISO black and white film, P33, their 160 ISO black and white film, and an orthochromatic 50 ISO film as well, which is a really nice thing to have because there isn't that many orthochromatic films out there. And I have to say, hats off to the lads behind Film Ferrania. You may have shot for the stars and landed on the moon, but the stars are still out there waiting for you. Hello. You know, one frame left on this P30. And that's the roll. Couplings. Also, it's raining again. This could work, maybe. Let's see. Viewpoint. Fucking steepness of this though, holy fuck. Once you've shot the film, of course you have to develop it. So for me, I developed it in Xtol at 1:1 dilution for 12 minutes at 20 degrees Celsius. And this produced some absolutely gorgeous looking negatives due to that high silver content. And the sharpness of these images is not actually unexpected at all. The ISO on this film is 80, and with such low ISO films, you tend to get really sharp, crisp, very nice images with a nice little bit of grain, but not too much to overpower any parts of the image. And this is something I actually really like because I'm actually a big fan of low ISO, sharp, nearly grainless films. I think they produce amazing images. Now, of course, the film is not only available in 35mm, I also shot it in 120 in the Bronica ETR. And of course, because of the larger negative size, the film grain gets a lot finer. And this produced some really beautiful images in the fog in the Wicklow Mountains. Now, while low ISOs, fine grain and detailed images are great, that's not what P30 is known for. It's known for its contrast. And you might ask, how much contrast? Yes. So this film is incredibly contrasty, but also produces a beautiful image using that contrast. And I think this is probably the most unique thing about the film, is that it gives you that lovely high contrast look, but it also doesn't lose too much detail while doing it. You know, I'm not entirely sure what kind of wizardry Ferrania is using for this, but that contrast is absolutely beautiful. And I have to say, I really, really like this film for that contrast. I think it looks amazing. So those are my first impressions of Film Ferraina's P30, an excellent black and white film with a really unique look and character and style. And I will definitely be shooting some more in the future, including I'm planning to pick up some P33, which is their 160 ISO version of this film, to shoot that as well, because I think it'll look really great in some situations. And with that, I'll see you next time. These 5 stags, bros before hoes, eh lads? Or should I say, bros before does? I'm sorry, that was terrible.